Do that. Okay, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to the Accounting for Impact event on Professor and Executive Director, the pros and cons of achieving impact through dual roles. So my name is Charles Cho. I'm the co-founder of Accounting for Impact. I'm here to basically facilitate, welcome you to our event today. We are very happy to host Kate Ruff from Carleton University and Leanne Keddie, who is also part of our Accounting for Impact team, who will be the moderator. So as I indicated, the event is recorded. It will be available on the website. But at this point, I will stop because Leanne is taking it away, and I will come back at the end of the event for some more announcements on future events and more information. So Leanne, the floor is yours, and you can get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. And hi, everybody. For those of you I've met before, welcome back and hello. And for those I haven't met, it's nice to see some new names here. I wanted to start by just acknowledging that I'm dialing in from traditional territories and unceded territories of the Algonquin people here. And I would encourage you to also think about where you're connecting to us from. I think this is really relevant in light of our topic today on social impact measurement. Just in terms of how we think about our values and those of others, how they both align and can differ, and how we can engage. I think that's really critical in today's context of Canada's history and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. So just take a moment to think about where you're coming in from. On that note, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kate Ruff. I have the great fortune to call Kate one of my incredible colleagues here. She's an associate professor of accounting at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. And she's leading what I think is just about the coolest project ever. So we're going to talk all about that today. I'm going to let her fill you in more on what that is and its amazing successes to date. But I just wanted to highlight before we start that I think this is a really interesting example of something that is possible, not easy, but possible in our work as academics. So welcome, Kate, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So maybe you can give us, to kick off, a little bit of background about how you got into this kind of work, what it means to you. I think it'd be great to set the stage.
All right, to set the stage, I'd like to tell 3 very short stories that I think drive my interest and how in this work and how I see it. The first story takes place when I'm about 20 years old. I started a .com business in university, and it tried to be what Canva became, and it failed. I had a moment a day when I had to call some angel investors and let them know that they were going to lose $50,000. They were very gracious about it. They were like, yeah, we knew it was likely. And on that same day, I got an email from a friend asking for $200 for water so that we bring wells to bring fresh water to 1,000 people in Africa. And on that day, I had $50,000 squandered with I squandered it, but to my investors with a shrug that would have at best brought something like Canva into the world, and $200 to bring fresh water to 1,000 people. And at age 20, that is the moment in the middle of my business degree where I decided capitalism was broken, and that if ever I was going to work very hard on something again, it would be to make the world a better place and not just for a graphic design software, for example. The second story, I've finished my undergraduate degree. I got a job with an INGO working in Nepal, advising them on marketing for their social enterprises in Nepal. And through that, I saw great impact measurement. The INGO was doing impact measurement. They had processes. The social enterprises also had these processes, but they weren't confident in them. So to the social enterprises I was working with, their profit felt rigorous, objective, concrete, true. They could make decisions with it. The impact measurement, which they had and were practicing, felt vague, uncertain, unclear. And I watched them make decisions that favored profit because they felt more confident in those numbers. So I got very interested in impact measurement as part of telling our story of what are we doing with our money and where do we put our money and how are we choosing to make profit in this world. The third story, I'm in my 30s. I'm on maternity leave in a small town in Massachusetts where my husband is working in a big city. I have been working in impact measurement for now 10 years. And I read a sentence in The Economist. Well, it's not even a full sentence that I remember. It says, before there were income statements. And at age 30, first occurred to me that we invented accounting. Obviously, I was aware that Neanderthals didn't have cash flow statements, but I'd never really drawn that connection of like, how did we invent this? And so on Saturdays, when my husband said, I'll take the kids, go do something fun, I went 5 basements down at a Harvard library and started reading about the origins of accounting and how we invented accounting. What I saw were claims saying we need better financial accounting, and then businessman after businessman coming forward, they were all men. It's too subjective. Businesses are too different. And if the point of disclosing this information is to give people confidence, we shouldn't do it because the people writing them are just going to fudge the numbers. That is exactly what I was hearing about impact measurement in around 2005. And it occurred to me from my business degree that I'd started with that accounting never really solved those problems. The text of the standard written to IFRS or like the CPA handbook does not address these problems. Accounting still has a lot of subjectivity. Businesses are still really different. And if you want to, you can still fudge the numbers. The way we solved it was not through what we wrote down in a document, but the ecosystem around it. So like there are analysts that analyze complex statements. There are credentialed accountants who are trained in particular types of subjective judgment and whose career depends on upholding that ethically. And there are auditors that overlook. So that became a sort of standards are communities, not document, has become one of my mantras through this work. And that there is an example of it's not just what's written in the text that is the standard, but the ecosystem around it that gives it credibility and flexibility. So I got into this work convinced that what I would do for a PhD in accounting was study that hypothesis, that it's this that the standard itself should be flexible, and the way we get around these problems is through an ecosystem of professionals, accountants, auditors, etc. And I was going to tell my colleagues in impact measurement about this to help them design impact measurement standards. At the time, they were trying to write a document that was just black and white and very clear, like this is how accounting is done, impact measurement is done. So that's how I got into it.
I love that. And I love how something that probably felt like a big failure at that first moment in time really wasn't. And you learned so much from it. And I think that sometimes gets lost, right? When we have these perceived failures, but actually it's just kicking something off that can be so much better and so much more beautiful and impactful, which is amazing. So on that, how did the Common Approach get started, and what is your role in it? And can you tell us a little bit more about it?
There was a task force in 2011. At this point, I was a first-year PhD student at Schulich that was created by the Government of Ontario. It was meant to think about impact measurement for impact investing in social enterprises. And it was a sort of a who's who of investors, philanthropists, charities, and social businesses. The B Labs was there, for example, as well as B Corps. And somehow I was invited to be on this, not because of anything on my CV at the time, still actually my CV would be the thinnest of all of those people. But I had shared these hypotheses about accounting with some of the people I was working with in impact measurement, and my name had come up. So I got to sit on this task force. The task force was convened by KPMG and co-hosted by 2 people from Carleton, co-chaired by 2 people from Carleton, but I did not yet know I would be at Carleton one day. So that group was incredible. And there was a real deep understanding of what made impact measurement hard. I learned a lot from that group. There were also some people, notably Mark Fox at U of T, who'd reached similar conclusions about what was needed for impact measurement, but he came at it from a computer science perspective. So he studies AI, data infrastructure, and was in the sort of the conclusion of his career focused using his computer technology know-how to help nonprofits do impact measurement, and it kind of reached some similar ideas about uniformity and flexibility and how to balance that. So there was a real sort of coming together of minds, and the task force wrote a call for a common approach to impact measurement, all lowercase, and a 5-step, 5-year action plan to make it happen. The government of Canada was looking at this problem and was starting to think about what became the Social Finance Fund and wanted to invest in impact measurement. So they subsequently, we are now in 2018, and I am in my first year of teaching at Sprott. They put out a call for an organization to implement the action plan. So make this plan come to life. And my team won. And so that's how we started. So we got $1 million to take 2 years to implement the first year of a 5-year plan. And we are now 5 years in, and we're probably on the 3rd year of the plan. So the plan was a bit more ambitious than it can be doable, but yeah, the team won there.
That's awesome. And so your role at the Common Approach, what do you handle like on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like?
Okay, so early on, I was a researcher, and I was the quarterback. It was deeply community driven. And so we had community experts leading parts of it, and I was mostly the quarterback with a vision and not doing much research. The role of the university was the statements from the community were that the community wanted to see this work come out of a university where they felt that was unbiased and thoughtful and prudent, well-managed, good infrastructure, but they didn't want it coming out of KPMG. They didn't want it coming out of a private business. They liked the idea that it came out of a university. So really, I was like a quarterback. Now I am half academic, half executive director. So as academic, I am leading our research, or implementation is research, and I can talk a little bit about that. But as executive director, I write employment policies on HR. I hire people. Sadly, I've had to let some people go. I do mentorship for junior staff. I get dressed up like this with a background like this to be the evangelicus, the spokesperson for the work. In terms of the work we do, where the implementation is research, we have we've almost completed a Pathfinder pilot where we are implementing the vision in 3 sites, 3 networks. Each of those networks is anchored by a community partner who leads the research with us. So they take research memos, they collect data, they do interviews, they have access to an online qualitative software called Deduce. We chose a software that facilitated a cloud-based approach with community members with access, and Vivo does not do that. It is, so they have access to that. They don't use it, but they have access to it. And so with them, we are documenting and designing at the same time through iteration what this flexible standard is. I feel like if I go on what it is, I'm going to get off the question a little bit. I think I've answered your question. Sorry, Leanne, I've gone on a few threads there.
That's perfect. Yeah, and I think actually we can weave in the research piece, because I wanted to ask about how you involve different stakeholders, which you've just touched on. But I know you've also done that in your research as well, in terms of going back to the research, to the stakeholders and getting their feedback on the work. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that role of research, but also how you've involved different stakeholders throughout the process.
This is where I think academia and applied research come into conflict, is these 2 worlds are moving at different speeds with different priorities. And so involving stakeholders has been deeply important, but really challenging. Leanne, you and I were at a fun dinner celebrating your tenure, in fact, recently. And in that meeting, we talked about our different approach for deadlines. And I told you a story about how I'd missed a deadline, but just called up and said, can I have a 2-week extension? It was granted. And you'd said, like, I would never. On reflection of that, I think my ability to miss deadlines is my superpower in this particular case. So one of the things we say in working with community is you move at the speed of trust. You can't move any faster than that. And deadline be damned. So involving stakeholders, our first move at the Common Approach was to build a collaborative governance structure made up of stakeholders. We have learned that the users we are engaging with are very busy and do not have the time or often the knowledge to engage on the questions we want to ask them. So instead, our stakeholder group is comprised of those whom our community trusts to speak on their behalf. That is different than what you would think of as like a representative sample in a sense of like a survey or something like that. Like, we're not actually talking to our end user. We're talking to people whom our end users trust. And that trust is earned through deep consultation. So a typical example would be that I would bring a question to my team. Hey, to use the Common Approach, it's really important that people are using aligned software. The magic happens in the background of software. We need people to use an aligned software. Why aren't they using it? Let me go back and talk to people. And so my community goes back and it talks to their people on their terms who they've got relationships with. And 4 months later, it comes back to me with some feedback at little bits at a time. So it's a very slow process, and to move at a speed that fits within research grants and fits within the timelines that I wrote in for myself on research grants. At some point, we would have had to say, don't consult with community, just speak from your own knowledge. And that breaks the trust, and that puts the people we're working with, they're breaking the trust with their people. And so I'm breaking my trust with them because they can't count on me to go slowly enough to give them the opportunity to show up the way they want. So involving stakeholders has been key. So we ask questions, we publish our questions, we publish all our minutes and all our agendas online. Anyone can see what we are doing. When we get answers, we publish results, and we share those results first with community. So we have this huge lag time. Another example, we've been doing work on Indigenous approaches to impact measurement. For that work, Marissa Hill, my colleague, was leading it, and she wanted to submit to the CAAA, the Canadian Academic Accounting Association's conference. And we had pretty much done everything. We almost had a completed paper, but it hadn't yet been reviewed by the elder. We hadn't yet had the ceremony that would bless the findings. And part of that ceremony would involve having everyone who participated in the findings speak to how they interpreted the findings and the authenticity of the findings from their perspective of their Indigenous community. And so we, Marissa wrote to the organizers of the conference, and we're like, we would like to submit this paper, but we can't tell you anything yet because it's all, we can't let it out the door until it's been gone through due process. And to their credit, they considered what we've written and actually are creating a event for us at the conference to talk about how to do research in this way that requires a protocol before you can submit a paper. So it's been very slow.
That's amazing. And I think it really speaks to this idea of, like, we don't have to, as you said in the beginning, directly necessarily connect with the stakeholders. We can use their trusted advisors. We can approach these things in different ways. We can break the deadlines, right? Like, we have all these constraints we've put on ourselves. And I have to say, I walked away from that dinner thinking the same thing. I can be more flexible, right? I can do these things differently instead of just adhering. And I think that's part of the inspiration of doing this kind of work and breaking out of some of the things that perhaps we've set up for ourselves as an academic community or as a society that we don't necessarily have to adhere to. Let's break those down and do it in a way that makes sense, especially in this case for the stakeholders, which I think is really, really beautiful.
I want to say
how,
two more things
yeah.
really practically there too. I have learned that putting stakeholders as co-directors on SHRCs is crucial in terms of moving money and giving the flexibility to do these kinds of things. So naming them as research partners and particular titles on grants, named research assistant for a grant, and then in ethics applications, name them on the research team. And this has been key to ethics. I love research ethics. We should have research ethics. And sometimes it can create all sorts of walls between the researcher who is meant to have privileged access to information and the participants who are meant to be protected from each other. Their information cannot go between them. Often it's assumed in a research ethics, unless you are very careful to design it such that there can be communication among participants about each other's findings and data, just upholding ethics can get in the way of a good conversation among stakeholders. So by naming a lot of stakeholders as researchers on the research ethics, it makes it easier to share data and work collaboratively with them.
That is a very good practical tip, because I think that is something that anybody who's done work in this kind of space can appreciate, especially if you want people talking together with each other. That's we understand the necessity of the ethics process for protection, but there also can be improvements, as you suggest, for sure. How do you see impact work in terms of academia, and how would you say maybe what's happened before or what you're seeing now differs or is the same as what the path is that you're shaping in impact?
Thank you for that question, Leanne. Just to help me answer it, are you talking about the way impact is used in this, like accountants having an impact, accounting scholars having an impact on the world, as in like making a difference, or impact in the way the common approach to impact measurement talks about it, which is like, how are we measuring doing social and environmental impact that way? Like,
we could do a part A and part B if you like. I was asking more on the academic side, but feel free to provide your comments on either.
So I would say, I don't know if I'm forging a path. I would say most days I feel like, not most days, many days I feel like I'm failing at both things. I am 1/3 academic right now, and my commitment with Sprott is to use that time to publish. And last week I submitted my first paper since 2001. So it's been really challenging to do the research as an academic. 2/3 of my time is executive director of an organization, and it's very hard to do that in a part-time role where I'm like mentoring other employees and trying to have one-to-one and help set their quarterly goals and just running an organization, the organization's budget, filings with the government. So I do often feel like I'm failing on everything, and I'm not necessarily sure this is a path that I would encourage a ton of people to follow behind me. That said, many days I love it. And what I like about it is I think we in academia have a muscle strengthened in our brain to read academic papers quite quickly, to do literature reviews quite quickly. And I am routinely checking out what's in the literature and bringing that to bear in a conversation with collaborators. Let me see if I can think of an example recently. We had to look up to what extent it was the academics knew what the essential practices of impact measurement were. So that was sort of a quick check. So I'm able to bring that forward into practice, and the practitioners like being validated. Oh, what I know has been published in academia, or they're really interested to know, oh gosh, no one knows this. It validates why I'm finding this hard. So there's that ability to sort of survey what is known and pull that into a very specific conversation. It wouldn't count as a literature review for a publication or a paper. It's not thorough enough. It doesn't define a clear gap. It's an hour of work looking in Google Scholar but really adds a lot of value to my collaborators, or adds some value to my collaborators. And I think that does right there make an impact. And then from my practical collaborators, I love how indifferent they are to publishing and how indifferent they are to research gaps. And their questions are great questions, but they are not thinking, is this a publishable research question? They are like, does answering this question make my life better today? Could I take the answer to this question and use it? And they, I need them to help me with research. They are my data collectors. They are my interpreters, and they don't engage on a question that has a nice gap in the literature. They engage in a question that they can use the results. And I found that really beautiful and helpful.
Yeah, I think those are really great examples of how the skills that we have as academics can be translated in a different way, right? It's that impact, but in a different way, perhaps, than what we've been thinking before. Yes, we publish. Yes, we publish the peer-reviewed articles, but to be able to take that, translate it, bring it to an audience that can actually make use of it on a day-to-day basis, good or bad, I think that's a really interesting path. And I certainly appreciate this is not an easy path, wearing two hats at the same time, but I certainly think it's inspiring to see you work through all of those bumps as you're going through. And certainly just in the project itself, I think we're already seeing pickup from the government and different aspects that are really transforming how we think about impact measurement from a practical sense, right? And bringing some of that back into the research, which is great. Perhaps before we open it up to some questions, what advice would you have to others on what you've learned through your work to date? This could be to other academics, it could be early career scholars, it could be people thinking about maybe going into academia or in this space. What advice would you have?
Advice feels like such an arrogant, I don't know if I want to say it's advice. I'll just say the things that have worked for me are knowing clearly what good I want to bring into the world. So keeping my research focused on that good and my engagement with practice focused on that good, rather than hopping from project to project sort of as it comes up or as it's available. So being quite focused. And I think that has helped me by so it earns some respect from the community and gives me a focus in academia. So yeah, I just being very clear on what my very specific focus is, which is in this case, what does a flexible standard look like that balances uniformity and flexibility in the case of impact measurement? Being choosy about my consulting projects. So where the person I'm working with has a question that is highly related to what I'm interested in doing, I say yes. I turn down probably 7 or 8 opportunities a year to work in practice with people that want help with their impact measurement. And that's just like, please do the work for me. Please come analyze my business and tell me what its impact is. And on that, I think there's a ton of really skilled consultants out there that can do the work. They are not, their problem is one of time and resources. It's not one of how do we balance uniformity and flexibility and impact measurement. And so unless their problem matches my problem, I refer them to a collaborator. So I'm being quite choosy about my engagements with practice. And I think moving at the speed of trust. And that comes with sort of a willingness to miss deadlines and work with funders to explain why the work wasn't done the way it was intended. Writing really honest recounts, and at the end of a grant, you have to write, how did it go? And there's a lot of, we accomplished 1/10 of what we planned because, rather than sort of pretending like it was successful. And so moving at the speed of trust is really about building true partnerships with community, giving them roles, letting them do that role on their terms, meeting them where they're at. So they're all doing research on the side of their desk. living with that. I've had researchers, for example, do interviews with me. Sometimes the interviews, they don't probe, like the quality is sometimes fuzzy, like they don't probe on questions that begged a follow-up question. Or they answer the question instead of letting the participant answer because they themselves are practitioners. Or we've even had cases where they like disclosed someone else's data in a way that was inappropriate. So spending a lot of time not stepping in that moment and then taking over, but mentoring on how to help our partners be good researchers, giving them the coaching they need and let them keep going, which often means sitting in on a lot of interviews early on and then letting them go. So it's a lot of mentorship and going slowly and investing in partnership. And hopefully it will pay off in the long run with a more collaborative ecosystem.
I think it will. And I think those are really, really great points. Definitely not easy, right? To, as you say, go at the speed of trust, to really invest in those relationships and build them. That takes time, right? And we're not always working in an environment that allows for time. We have outputs that are wanted or, evidence that there's been progress. So I certainly appreciate that as well. I want to be able to open it up so that we have time for some questions. And I did see, by the way, many nods, heads nodding, thumbs up as you were speaking, Kate. So any questions so far as we've come along talking about Kate's work? Anything you'd like to hear more about? Feel free to raise your hand, type it in the chat if you prefer. I'm happy to pose those.
Oh, Haley, I was going to ask you to speak because I know you've been doing a lot of this yourself with a very similar situation between academia and practice. So yeah, I'm glad you put up your hand.
Oh, well, yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And can I just say that I love your top? It is so cool and fun. I mean, there's so many things I could ask you, Kate. I always find that you're a wealth of knowledge and promise and potential in the impact measurement space. So I'll just pick one for now. But one thing that I would like to come back to is like this opening that you had where you were drawing on your initial motivations, and like that was so lovely to hear. But one thing that I'm also curious about, and also I guess push at with my own career, is this like space between academia and practice. And so one of the things you were highlighting is how there is actually quite a lot of similarities between the debates we're having in impact measurement and whether or not we can get to a space where we have these consistent or uniform accounts. Standardization is another debate, but like we want to move towards some sort of accounting system with impact, and yet there's all these reasons people say that it's impossible or won't happen or is impact is too fuzzy. And I loved how that was part of your motivation, that in history you were able to see that the financial accounting system had started with something similar. But then I guess my question for you is like, what do you see, like, although there is this progress and there is the amazing work by the Common Approach and others around the world to develop some sorts of systems and principles, frameworks even, like, what do you notice remain some of the sticking points? Like, where would you be, what are you pushing most against, or where are the stickiest debates? Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Great question.
So where are the stickiest debates in impact measurement? Oh, I love that. Okay. Greenwashing. I think greenwashing is doing more to deter people from trying for fear that they get shamed as having malintention if it's not strong than it is to invite people in to try. And I'm talking about large corporations. So from an academic point of view, the question is, what is the difference when you get a shoddy impact report out of a corporation? What is the difference between a learning journey and malintention? And if we were to think carefully about greenwashing, how would we start to look for malintention versus the data is really scant? It's really hard there's contradictory things. Like, we know we don't want to burden people with undue. When you are a big corporation, your impact comes from a tiers upon tiers upon tiers of people who you need to burden to get good data, or you get crappy data. Those are your options. And we tell you, you can't have crappy data and you can't burden other people. So we've put you in a catch-22. And okay, so that is one, is greenwashing. I would really want to unpack greenwashing because I think it is holding us back right now. The other one that I would like to call attention to is, where is uniformity appropriate and where is flexibility needed? And I think this is not fully understood yet, including by myself. I have a hypothesis that I'm working on that, are you familiar with the Impact Frontiers ABC framework? A is for avoid, I'm going to say it for everybody. A is for avoid harm. So that's like reduce your carbon outputs, don't pollute so much. B is benefit stakeholders. So that is workplace safety, ethical products that are healthy, and good policies for your staff, inclusive of gender identities, for example. And then C is contribute to solutions. So that is where you are innovating a solution to an area that's been underserved or has an undermet need. I think we need we can and do need uniformity on A and B. We can count greenhouse gas emissions in a pretty structured way. We can have pretty black and white measures of workplace vitalities and whether or not there's a policy that is gender inclusive. When it comes down to innovation of C, contributing to solutions, that's where I think we are not going to come up with a standard list of indicators everywhere. And so I think our challenge is to unpack this thing that is impact and start thinking about specific strategies for specific things, which I think our accounting standards do. Our accounting standards have different types of rules for different things and different types of organizations. Assets. I'm not going to give example on accounting right now. I think we all understand accounting. I picked two for you, Kelly. What do you think?
I totally agree. Yeah, I think those are great. And I loved your unique take on greenwashing. How refreshing, that we can't consider them all in the same bucket, and that absolutely we need space for people that are genuine and just not doing it right. It doesn't mean that they were doing it with malintention. So yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah.
I think we have Cameron next.
Hey, Kate, I wonder if you would be willing to discuss briefly the relationship between this kind of work and tenure and promotions.
That is a lovely.
You don't have to if you don't want to. But,
no, well, I am very grateful to my tenure and promotion framework at Sprott. It is very specific. There were very clear, for all we don't like, measuring journal quality with a 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, or C, and putting numbers on things. Sprott has a pretty clear workload framework that sets the norms in a very countable way with very clear lists and what's expected, and it wasn't a political process. And I found that my research engagement allowed, let me take that back. I am going to take that back. I was going to be like, I was able to do my engaged research and get tenure, but actually it was thanks to fabulous co-authors like you that allowed me to publish on things that were slightly outside my engagement to get tenure. And then since getting tenure, I've been focusing on this. So I was about to tell you it's completely compatible. And with a little bit of thinking, I'm going to tell you it's incompatible, that I have not been able to publish on the common approach yet. And
Yeah.
if I'd been focused on that, I would not have gotten tenure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Because one of the things that I was knowing, I understood was in the background, was this understanding that this money that was behind this project was not regarded by academics as actually peer-reviewed funding, which is a problem in the TMP process. And if they'd seen this as somehow counting towards tenure because it was peer reviewed, you wouldn't have had the same kinds of issues.
That is true. I got $1 million grant from the Government of Canada to start Common Approach, and my tenure application valued a $15,000 shirk as way more impressive.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
Great questions. Any other burning questions that anybody has? I do have some more of my own, but happy to let others speak. So we have I think a question in the chat, dialed in from London, UK, but work mostly in Australia. Drew from the wisdom and expertise of the Gadigal ancestors and Eora Nation. Definitely appreciate your discussion on the inclusion of our respective First Peoples. From what I have learned so far, the mere definition of impact, there's so much to be unpacked in the inclusion of our First Peoples perspective. I think this harks back a little bit to what I tried to set the stage with a little bit, just this idea of value and who values what and how do we value things and what is the measurement and what's the impact. But Kate, your thoughts on that?
Okay, I have so many thoughts. Joanna, thank you for the question. So in terms of valuing and thinking about uniformity and flexibility, I believe the truest impact is in the words of the people whose lives are most affected, that they know what their impact is and they can communicate it, and the goal of account impact measurement is accounting. It's acting at a distance, but that distance should not be from the investor telling someone who's being affected how to live their life, but the other way around, which is the people whose lives are being affected communicating up to an investor, here's what we need, here's what's working, here's what we value. So it is crucial that all measurement that is seeking to contribute to change, that C category, in my view, come from the voices of those who are affected according to their values. So 100%, Joanna, particularly when those are First People, Indigenous peoples. There are some things that are often different than someone from a more Western perspective. So in terms of valuation, what is valued, I think you'll know this, Joanna, but we see a lot more connecting to the spirit world in terms of what's valued, and communal rights as opposed to individual rights, communal benefit as opposed to individual benefit. So if you look at any of the uniform top-down indicators that have been created, they're almost all framed as individual benefit as opposed to community benefit. And that's one of the examples where Indigenous perspectives get overlooked in our existing systems. So yes, I'm agreeing with everything that's been said. What did I want to say next about how to get those values up? I don't know if there was a question, so I think I'll just say yes to that. That's great. Did you want to say anything, Joanna? I noticed you're putting things.
Great, thanks. No, I find it really, really engaging, and it's an area that I've been like really interested in. Yeah, particularly with, working with Indigenous communities. And you're right in terms of really including them in this process, whether we're doing it in practice or our work in academia, is to kind of have that kind of more inclusive approach when it comes to this. Like I was trying to allude to, like even the mere definition of impact, of what impact we're actually looking at, the value that is placed on self-determination and or perspectives on what makes a good economy is, it's not quite aligned with, how we push it out. So I think there is still quite a lot to, be unpacked there and learned from there. And yeah, like I said, it's like an ancient wisdom, and it's something that can definitely be drawn from.
I think that's really important. especially as we sort of think about the whole flavor of the conversation today and engaging with stakeholders or their trusted representatives, and how do we reflect that value in accounting if we can? How do we do it? Where do we do it? Those are all really, really critical topics because it is constructed, right? We made it up. We made up accounting, so we can change it. Cameron, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question, Kate. Maybe longer for you to answer than me to ask. Um, I am using GRI in the classroom as a way of problematizing this question of how do you measure the impact of an organization on different aspects, environment and society. Have you got any teaching tools that we could be pulling into the classroom? There's a leading question for you, because I'm sure you must.
I also have used GRI. I think that's a great one. I think asking students to read some GRI reports and identify which of the two organizations is better brings home very quickly how challenging it is to use the information that is disclosed in GRI to come up with an answer. And I think it also highlights that doesn't make it wrong or bad, just makes it hard. And I think that's a key message I always like to invite my students to consider, is that two different answers doesn't mean two wrong answers. It means possibly two reasonable answers that are both different in terms of how it depends on your values. I like to take B Lab assessments also and compare two companies and what their B scores are, and invite students to analyze that. There is an implicit value system that weighs, for example, a company's environmental work, its policies, with things like parental leave and things like a product that benefits society. And in the background, B Labs has a rubric that weights these things that is not transparent to the viewer. And so I like to challenge students also on the implicit values that are in the background there. So I think your teaching sounds great. There's a new standard out from Impact Frontiers, and I think if you were wanting to be super current with your students, I would invite them to pay attention to the Impact Frontiers work on investment reporting. And I think that's a leader right now that does a little bit better than GRI's approach to materiality in terms of what gets presented, why, and how.
And can I maybe just add, because I know we use this in our course, and Kate was part of the development process, but there is a course that she contributed to by Kathy Clark on Coursera, and we've embedded it in our co-design sustainability accounting and social impact measurement course. Students can access parts. They don't have to do it all, but it has some great resources, lots of very easy to digest pieces, and full credit to Kate for her work on that. She didn't mention it, but I do think it's a really great resource for people.
It's one of the best ones because it connects what impact measurement looks like for an organization to what impact measurement looks like for an investor. And normally you only get one side of that story, for example, with GRI. So I really like it for that. Sorry, Cam, I saw you were speaking, but you're on mute.
How's this? I'm just looking at your quick guide page, and you've got things like the Common Form and Common Impact Data Standard. Are those possibly helpful in the classroom?
I love that question. Thank you. The common approach to impact measurement is based on 4 standards, as you are now looking at on the quick start guide, but we would not recommend anyone use it yet. So we are full tilt trying to get it implemented with our 3 Pathfinder networks and then the 6,000 organizations that are going to use it for the Canadian Social Finance Fund. And we are learning a lot on the way, and it doesn't yet do what we think it does. So I like to say we just last March, we did the thing, like it all worked, but we didn't stick the landing. It wasn't tidy, it wasn't clean, and it required a bit too much hand-holding and fixing along the way. So the website there communicates what we're doing and what our vision is, but until it's really working smoothly and beautifully, I like to say there's no evidence that it does work, but there's not yet any evidence it doesn't work. It's sort of, we've got little case studies that seem to suggest it will work when it all comes together. It's a systems-wide solution. So it's not designed for something one organization does. It's designed for how organizations mesh together. And in order for that to work, you need lots of organizations using it. My analogy is it's like a telephone. And if you were the first person to get a telephone, you'd be like, well, this is awesome. Who can I call? I'd be like, no one unless they have a telephone. So when we first launched the Common Approach, we had this challenge where we were like, who wants a telephone? And we got like 15 organizations like, I've got one. Who can I call? I'm like, you can call these other 15 people. They're like, I don't want to share my impact data with these 15 people. That is not helpful to me. So we've had to roll out intentionally in networks to get that benefit. And so until it's working, I would say keep your students focused on GRI and the work that's further ahead, Impact Frontiers.
That's amazing. What a fantastic way to roll this thing out, and very insightful. Well done.
Thanks.
Any other questions at the moment? I have a couple more questions. I know we're going to be wrapping up, but maybe just really, really quickly, give you a few minutes to leave us with, let's say, 3 takeaways. What would be 3 things you would like us to remember, learn, know, either about your work or the challenges or what's happening? 3 things you want us to walk away with.
Okay, well, just one of my key messages would be that we have to be very careful comparing impact measurement to accounting. If it were true that there was something you could look at in a financial statement that told an investor if you could invest, we would have an entire industry of investment analysts and CFAs out of work. Accounting statements communicate information, but there is a whole lot of work that has to happen to those statements to turn that into like, do I invest? Do I loan? What do I do with this this information? And smart people, well-trained, good intentions come up with different answers. So I really would like us to teach our students that impact measurement is going to be hard, and that we can have factual information. That does not mean there's only one truth. There is several truths, just like accounting could look different had different rules been applied, right? There are judgment moments that change what exact numbers show up on a financial statement. So there is wiggle room in impact statements that is not always insincerity or fraudulence or even incompetence. It's just nuance. So that's 1. 2, smart people looking at the same impact statements can make reasonably different conclusions based on their values. And I think that's a really important thing to drive home to our students. We cannot expect anyone that says impact does not have a bottom line, like profit has a bottom line. I think they've overlooked the complexity of how we make decisions with financial statements. We don't just look at a single bottom line. So that's my one message, is to give impact measurement some space to breathe and some space to grow this ecosystem and debate and dialogue around how we're going to treat this data. 2, I haven't told you much about the Common Approach, but just, I don't know how to say, it's not working yet, but it's working now. I don't know where to put that in, like the Pathfinder, the pilot stuff is working okay. I wouldn't ask the whole world to use it yet. It's like in trials. It's like drug trials right now. So a promising drug trial would be the best way to hold what we're doing with the Common Approach right now. And then 3, this is about being both an executive director and an academic. And I would say it can be fun, but it's really hard. So you better be sure you love both jobs and there isn't one you want to give up, because if you don't love them both, you do feel like it can be a bit exhausting. So that's my
lot. It's a lot for sure. No, and I want to thank you so much, because I think it's not only helps us to expand our own definitions of impact, and how we can have impact and the work that we're doing, but also in our roles. I think it starts to break us free from perhaps some of the rules that we might think we have to follow. But in fact, like you're finding a different path, a different way to achieve the things that are important to you. So I personally find that very inspiring because I think it's nice to believe and know that these things are possible, not easy, but possible if you really enjoy the work and you're really trying to make a difference in whatever it is that means something to you. So thank you so much for your insight and work. I think it's been a really, really interesting discussion. I've learned a lot. Even though I work with you, I still always learn something every time we chat. So we've got maybe a few minutes to wrap up. I'll pass it back to Charles. I think he wanted to uh, just close, but thank you again. Thank you for such a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Yes, great. Thank you both, Kate and Leanne. Amazing conversation. I think you got a lot of interest and you inspire a lot of people through your work. The Accounting for Impact, as you know, it's all about this, to give some, information and feedback and experience sharing, how to foster engagement and impact for accounting scholars and beyond. Actually, we have some colleagues now I see from outside accounting, which is great. So I just wanted to thank everyone and also announce a few future events that we have planned. This time we are actually ahead, and we have actually 3 events planned for sure. I'll put the dates on the chat. You will be receiving, of course, emails and social media. Our next event on June 26th online. I'd like to highlight the October 4th one, which will be our first in-person event. So I know that it's not going to be too easy for everybody to attend, but we will have an event here in Toronto in collaboration with CP Ontario, which is actually our one of our funder. And the theme will be diversity, equity, inclusion. And then there will be one more in November 22nd. So you can mark those calendars. You will receive this information as we go along. We don't have all the details ready, but we have those dates set. So, and as mentioned in the chat, feel free to join the community. You're getting newsletters and emails from us. So follow on social media if you can. And we look forward to seeing you at future AFI events. We wish you great day, great evening ahead of you, and hope to see you very soon. Thank you very much again for attending.
Thanks so much.